At What Cost? By Let Me Read You a Story. As night fell over the desert, the poor villagers, tired from working themselves all day in the blistering heat, retired to bed, except for a small few. Ben, a simple farmer, and three of his friends lay staring at the stars, dreaming of what could be. They talked all night of the lives they wished they had, having the money to buy anything they wished, food and drink fit for royalty, and homes large enough to house the whole village. One of the friends spoke of a legend he was told as a child, a story of a secret land, and for the one who found it, it would grant all their wishes. Ben was taken by the story and insisted they search for it. The others tried to see reason, telling them that even if the legend was true, they would have to trek across lands beyond anything they were prepared for. But despite their aversion, Ben had his heart set on finding it, telling his friends, "We can make it if we do it together." The next day they set off. It was no lie that the journey soon took its toll on them. Rationing supplies was hard, and the long and harsh treks were grueling, but Ben always found a way to pull them through, always helping his fallen comrades, finding ways to make them laugh and encouraging them to stick together. After days of crossing the desert, they came to a vast lake, of which they would have to cross. They quickly made a raft, though one friend was not so eager to set sail, afraid of the water. Ben had to use all of his charm and trust to convince them to get on board. They began their voyage. At first the raft held together, and they made swift progress. Not that this calmed the friend, of whom screamed and panicked the whole way. Even Ben, with his patience, struggled to deal with them. As they got close enough to see the other side, the friend began to panic more violently. They shook free the base of the raft, and soon water started coming in. The friend went mad, screaming, unable to listen to Ben, trying to calm her down. The raft, slowly but surely, sank below the water. The other three friends tried to help, holding them up, but their thrashing made it almost impossible. In trying to help, the others struggled to stay above the surface, fighting for air. Ben bore the brunt of it, almost carrying them on his back. He tried as hard as he could to stay above the water, but the weight on his shoulders was too much, falling below and running out of air. As he rushed to the surface to catch a breath, he lost his grip on the friend, and they too fell below the water. He dived down and tried to pull him up. The others, seemingly too exhausted, hadn't noticed, and so Ben was alone. He gave it everything he had and just barely pulled them high enough to catch a breath. They eventually reached the shore and got their rest. Ben knew in this moment that if he wanted all of them to make it, it was going to be harder than he ever imagined. They continued their journey, finding themselves lost inside a dense jungle. Ben marched forward, his words of encouragement pulling the rest through, though the more the last friend complained, the more Ben struggled to find the energy to keep dragging them along. As the trees cleared, they saw mountains towering above them, the tallest of which reached into the clouds. Ben turned to his friends. "If this legend you speak of really exists, then that is where it will be." They began their climb. Ben and most of the others kept up good pace, smiling to each other, knowing they were close. But of course, their progress was slowed as the last friend struggled to carry themselves up the mountains. Ben helped all he could, but his patience wore thin as his eagerness wanted to pull him towards his goal. They came to a steep cliff, one they knew they would have to climb. As expected, the last of them could not carry their own weight and barely made it a foot off the ground. The others linked themselves with ropes to help bear some of the weight, but this came to little use. They still struggled to carry them, and now all of them were exhausted. Ben gave it everything he had, pleading with the others to keep pushing, but as he turned to look at them, he saw a look in their eyes, a look he hoped he would never see. They were done, drained of energy, and if they were going to make it, they saw only one option. Ben regretfully looked to their friend down below, one of whom he had known for so long, but he too was exhausted and could not go on like this any longer. Ben and his friends untied their ropes and watched as their close friend fell back to the ground. Already feeling the freedom on his shoulders, Ben carried on up the mountains. Days passed, and the peak seemed no closer. The three found themselves not at the foot of a mountain, but a volcano, with lava streams blocking their way. They stepped carefully over patches the lava could not reach, but those came sparingly, and it only got harder for them to get through. Ben walked in between his two remaining friends, the one ahead coming to what looked like a stable rock, but when he stepped atop it, it quickly sunk. The friend darted across whatever rocks he could see as they sunk below his feet, and by some miracle made it across. Ben looked for another rock, carefully pressing his weight on it, only to see it sink. There was only one path of rocks left, but if they sank as the others did, only one could get across. The other friend looked for all the options they could, while Ben stayed calm. He looked out and told the friend he knew what they had to do. He told them to get something for him. But when the friend looked away, Ben ran across the path, the last remaining rocks sinking below him, and the path was closed. Ben couldn't bear to look at his friend as they screamed at him to come back, but Ben's mind was made up. He and the one remaining friend left the other and began their final climb to the peak. The mood that night was frosty as they set up camp. Ben and his last friend barely spoke that night, only glaring at each other, not wanting to talk about what happened. They settled, ready to sleep, when the friend asked what he thought they would be given upon arriving. "Do you think it will grant all of our wishes?" they asked. "What do you mean?" Ben replied. "The legend said the one who found it. What if it was only meant for one?" Silence fell between them as they stared at each other, the penny dropping. Both jumped to their feet and ran for the peak. They pushed and threw each other as they battled towards the top. Ben got the jump and charged ahead until he came to a cave, dark and seemingly endless. The air was cold, and yet something called him in. As Ben paused, the friend caught up and rushed up behind him. The two raced into the darkness, unable to see. They both staggered round. They tackled each other, fighting to move forward. In the distance they saw a faint light. They both rushed for it. Ben saw his friend get ahead and took to grabbing him and forcing him to the ground. The two hit and stepped on each other, fighting to get ahead. Ben drew on the pain he had endured throughout his journey and knocked his friend clean over with a scream and a thump. Ben darted towards the light, not caring for the cries of his fallen friend, begging him to help him. Ben left his warriors behind, and thinking of his greatest desires, he dived into the light. He emerged to the sight he had long hoped for. A feast lay before him, with more food and drink than he could dream of, more money than he knew how to spend, and a home fit for a king. Ben was amazed and was ready to live out his dream. But as he looked around, he saw something was wrong. He was alone. He had everything he ever wanted, but had no one to share it with. He had made the journey, but discarding his friends along the way. And so now he sat with all his rewards, but at what cost? Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing to hear more from this channel.